Shark Shark. This is Coach William Moore from the great state of New York. I'm glad you are joining this training on reclaiming our power because credit is a tool for the next civil rights movement. One of the things we want people to understand is that there's been a lot of changes that are taking place, a lot of changes a lot of people just don't understand. This is our new civil rights movement because credit is the center of all business, it's the essence of financial planning. A little information about me. Been doing this for over 2 decades. Currently located in the great state of New York. I am a certified credit counselor. And one of the key things I want to educate people about how they can use credit to their advantages. And in every great presentation, you always have to have a disclaimer. The information provided during this presentation is for education and informational purposes only and does not constitute legal, financial, or credit advice. Coach Moore is very good at what he do, but Coach Moore is not an attorney or a certified financial planner or a credit attorney. While every effort has been made to ensure the accuracy of the information shared, individual results may vary based on personal circumstances. Participants are encouraged to consult with a licensed attorney, financial advisor, credit professional, or advise specific on this situation. And so, not necessarily the biggest Jim Carrey fan, but I give credit where credit is due. He said, if you're not willing to downgrade your lifestyle for a year to have a lifestyle you want forever, you care too much of what other people think. And that is so true. So many times people are following the Joneses, not recognizing the Joneses are broke. This is what we're going to be really discussing, the State of the Union, some of the trends that are taking place in 2025. There's been a shift in the credit industry. We're going to talk about what you should do as far as having a personal credit assessment and how you can actually boost, your credit. In the State of the Union, there are so many things that are happening. It's almost like a reverse Robin Hood effect. Just think about it. It's almost like taking from the rich to give to the poor. So we're talking about recent developments, the DEI initiatives, the purge of the Department of Education, new tariffs, this big, beautiful bill act, the dismantling of CFPB, the regulations on banking, delayed advantage scoring, and just really our voting rights are in danger. And so with the passing of the Big Beautiful Act, one of the things we want people to understand is that this is working lovely for people who are in business, but for consumers, not so much. But the most thing I want you to take away from is that it reduces federal oversight of financial institutions. Where do you go to when now all these fees are now coming to you? Where do you go to complain? The shutting down or the dismantling of the CFPB. What we now understand is that this was a consumer's protection um, when things were happening, with their credit or with their finances. You know, Now we're talking about fewer legal avenues for consumers to challenge financial abuse. We're talking about tighter and stricter banking regulations now, where your DTI is very important, where your debt to income ratio, you're talking about your credit scores and your credit reports. Now we're talking about even tighter documented requirements for borrowers. How about the Vantage scoring system? Most people don't understand what FICO is. They're not really familiar with Vantage and Vantage 4.0. This basically was giving people a fair hand on being able to report other items in their credit. Now, with the delay of the implementation of this, it's going to make it much harder. How about your voting rights are in danger? Now, hold up. Right now, there's a Supreme Court case right now. It's pending on the Voting Rights Act. This is Louisiana versus Calabasas. Basically, if a disparate impact is struck down, that's going to make it harder to prove voter discrimination. And so, if there's any private lawsuits and stuff, you're not going to actually have government agencies to back you simply if this goes down. So, we're talking about something much deeper than just credit. We're talking about your voice and your resources and your future. And so, what we want people to understand is that voting actually decides resources. So, you're talking about schools, housing, banks, jobs. And there are a lot of people who are disenfranchised. And, you ever heard of redlining? They're still in redlining areas. That actually still happens. So even if you have good credit, what we have found is that black and brown borrowers are still getting 24% or higher APR as opposed to the standard 3.5% APR if you have that type of a score. So your vote really matters. And so we want people to pay attention to let you know that this is actually happening. What we're really looking at is we're witnessing a crumbling world. This is really the financial crash of 2.0. And the reason why I say that only is because if you understand how the financial crash happened back in 2007, 2008, all the regulations was out the window. which means that private industries actually could go crazy. I remember, just really going through everything these last 6 months. I just felt very frustrated and understanding that why is all this evil happening around me? And then, I had my Bible next to me and I moved too abruptly and it fell on the ground. And when I picked it up, it's amazing. The story of Habakkuk just happened to appear. And I'm like, oh, that's right. This has actually happened before. The prophet Habakkuk actually, with everything that was going on in Judea at that time, he asked the Lord, why is all this happening? Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing? That's how I felt at that time. I was also happy to know that there was actually an answer. What we want people to know is that we are in the new nadir period. Most people don't know what the nadir period was. This was actually post Civil War up until like around 1920. During that time, highest racial discrimination. I want people to know is that before there was a Civil Rights Act, before there was a Voting Rights Act and the Immigration Act and the Fair Housing Act and affirmative action and DI, before all of that was put into place, it was the nadir period where we actually created Black Wall Street. We created HBCUs. We stuck together and we understood that the laws in this country are not for us, so we must band together. And that's why, though the fig tree does not bud and there are no grapes on the vines, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will be joyful in God, my Savior. That was Habakkuk. But it recognized God says, I know it looks bad, but I got a plan. And ladies and gentlemen, that's where I think we are right now. We must have a plan. Passport to your financial freedom is credit. As I mentioned before, credit is the center of all business. It's the essence of financial planning. But right or not, we are in a digital movement. This is where the young people really come into play. Here are 10 points on how credit is the new civil rights of the 21st century. First of all, economic and access mobility, systemic inequality and strong scoring. Credit is a gateway to home ownership. The impact of credit on employment, predatory lending and debt traps, financial literacy as empowerment, access to business capital, redlining 2.0, which is credit-based discrimination, and the role of credit in the generation of wealth, credit as a tool for civil rights advocacy. Without understanding the information, you cannot fight back because credit is all about risk. If you want to mitigate risk, you need to understand these are the 5 areas of credit. And the biggest piece of the pie is your payment history and your amounts owed on your existing credit. And so if people understand how they pay their bills and how they handle existing credit, ladies and gentlemen, they can actually turn themselves around and they can become a very effective tool. What is considered a good score? Most people don't know. What you're looking at are two of the greatest examples of gymnasts that our country has produced. Of course, Mary Lou Retton, she became the first person to get a perfect 10 in Olympic competition. And then, of course, the great Simone Biles. What can I say? You know, her level of difficulty was so high, judges couldn't even score it. That's why she always got high marks. Credit really is the same thing. It is really your level of difficulty. This is the range. It goes from 300 to 850. You have to ask yourself, where are you right now? Look at the difference between good and fair. Fair ends off at 659. Good starts at 660. We're talking about 1 percentage point. But now Coach Moore is going to tell you something that you may not understand, but you must believe. It's not all about your score. It is all about your report. Ladies and gentlemen, your credit score is almost like having a resume, but your credit report is a job interview. And nowhere has anybody just gotten a job off of their resume. They actually have to come in for an interview. Your credit report really is the same thing because it gives a full story. Your credit report gives a detailed history of your borrowing behavior. It shows your payment history, your credit card utilization, your collections if you have any, especially with existing balances, types of credit, agent accounts, any recent inquiries, your public records, all that is displayed on your report. And so you may have a good score of a 680 or a 700 or a 710. However, if you have these type of items on your report, you're not going to get the job. You're not going to get the loan. Your application is not going to be approved. And if it is, then you're going to pay higher interest rates because there was a shift, ladies and gentlemen, in the credit industry in regards of credit. The FICO 10 scoring system came out in about 2020. Obviously, we were during COVID at that time, so no one was paying attention. What it focused on was trended data and payment habits. It looked at having a 24-month look back period on your credit. So you imagine it's 2025 and in 2023 you had some late payments. However, that is still hurting you, even though that might have been 2 years or more ago. So all these things that they are looking at. And so when I'm looking at a report, I want to see all greens because if I see all greens, then I know it is all good. However, if I'm looking at your report and I start seeing some color codes that I don't recognize, meaning late payments, what does that tell me? That tells me that you're carrying over high balances and you may still have a good report. You may still have a good score. Okay. Just because you have these things mean you can't have a good score. But now when we're looking at this, what are we looking at? We're looking at items and collections and things of that nature. Then I recognize this is not going to work. How about existing credit? Here's an example of a credit card. This person has a balance of 1466, but the limit on the card is 1500. That's a utilization ratio of 98%. Ladies and gentlemen, the standard is 30% or lower. This person's at 98%. But how about a double whammy? Not only does this person have a high utilization ratio, but they have late pays on the credit as well. So this person paid late and has a high utilization ratio. And this is just off of one card. Start multiplying that by a couple of cards. You start now getting the picture on like, oh my goodness, this person here is putting themselves in a very bad position, and that is 30% of their score. Everything is based upon here. How about a home loan at 385,000 at a fixed 30-year rate? Look at the difference in interest rates and monthly payments based upon your scores. And so what I'm telling you is that there are thousands of dollars that people are overpaying simply because they don't recognize their score. But in their mind, they got the house. And so, yes, you did get the house, but what are you paying for that house? Or you might got the car, but what are you paying on that car? And so I believe that everyone should be able to do a personal credit assessment. And in doing that assessment, here are some of the necessary ingredients. First of all, everyone must have credit monitoring. That is mandatory. And I don't endorse any particular service, but the thing is that it must be a service that shows all three reports. You can't have a service that just scores two simply because it's free. You must get the whole picture. You must then look at your payments, your utilization, the items you may have in collections, and looking at your current debt to income ratio. When anybody's talking to me, these are things that they actually should know. And so when we're talking about a credit monitoring service, this is a monthly service that you have to pay for. This does display all three of the reports. It tracks down everything monthly because scores actually update every 30 days. This is an essential tool if you're talking about having your credit. And then we're talking about, of course, how do you pay your bills? Are you paying on a timely basis? This is 35% of your score right here. This is a major component to a healthy profile. We talked about existing credit. You should always have, a existing of 30% or less utilization on each of your credit cards. Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to improve your credit profile, if you can get you down to a 10%, even 5% utilization ratio, you are ahead of the game. What's the formula? You take the limit of the card divided by three. Whatever that number is, you should never go any higher than that number. In this situation, the limit was $1,000. You divide it by three, which represents 30%. That means you should never go over more in this situation, more than $333 if you want to keep a healthy utilization ratio. How about collections? There are two types of collections. You have first party and you have third party. First party, of course, is the organization or the company that you've actually done business with. They use internal team to collect debt and acquire the services of the agency. So if you had an account with Sears, and now you are late on Sears and they're coming after you. This is still first party. What you want to avoid is third party. Third party are collection agencies. These are people now who have now bought the debt on pennies in the dollar and they're going after you. What you also need to understand is that they can also put this negatively on your report. So you were listed negative on the Sears initially, and now they're coming after you. Sears decides, let's just sell it. Now a third party company coming after you, and they're also listing at negative on the report. So you actually got hit twice off the same thing, and this is perfectly legal. And so understanding that when you have a third party, it's really double jeopardy. because it's affecting your debt to income ratio and it's a negative item. So what do most people tell me? Okay, Coach Moore, I'll just pay what's owed. Great. That's going to help your debt to income ratio. But what about that negative item that's still on your report? The negative item stays on for 7 years. So though you paid it, what you wanted to get is some type of letter of satisfaction. So if you're ever going for a loan and they ask you, hey, listen, what about this collections here? You can at least show them that you did pay the debt. What is your debt to income ratio? This is also very important because your DTI measures your ability to manage debt payments relative to your income. Lenders use it to determine mortgage affordability. So the formula was always your monthly debt payments divided by your gross monthly income times 100. And so what is your debt? Any rent, any car loans, student loans, credit card payments, personal loans, child support, or alimony, but make sure you do not include utilities and groceries and insurance and anything like that. That's not really part of your debt. And then, of course, your income, whatever you're making, your salary, your wages, any bonuses and overtimes, it's been consistent. So, if you've been working at least 10 or more months of overtime, you have to include that. Any side business that you have, that's documented, which means you're claiming any rental income, social security, all this is considered your monthly debt. And then you just apply the formula. You take your total monthly debt payments, and divide that by your gross monthly income and you multiply that by 100. So here's an example. If your total monthly debt payments was 1,500, your gross monthly income is 5,000. When you do the calculation, that means that you have a DTI of 30%, which is ideal. Because here's a chart. What is a good DTI ratio? Anything below 36% is ideal. 37 to 43% is acceptable, but may require some compensating factors. 44% and above is risky, may require reducing debt or increasing income. Now, if someone accepts you at 50% or higher, these are warning signs of predatory lenders. This is why dismantling of CFPB is so critical, is because they actually put a gap on as to how predatory lenders could come to you in regards to offering you things. Now that it's been dismantled, predatory lenders can now go wild. And so when we talk about the big, beautiful bill, listen, whatever side of the aisle that you on, great. I want you to keep voting your conscience. But I want you to understand is that the big, beautiful bill, as bad as it is for consumers, not so bad in regards of credit. You need to know these things so you actually know how to fight back. And so when you talk about the current practices versus the new changes, when it comes to medical debt, this now with medical debt that it did not appear in your credit report, now, ladies and gentlemen, is a completely eliminated. So that's a good thing. We're talking about maintaining permanent collections and charge-offs. These are things that have to come off after 3 years. And so the key things you got to look at what you have right now. Print your data. This was optional in underwriting, but now under the new bill, it will be mandated. So remember the 24-month look back I was talking about? That's exactly what this is. We're talking about rent and utility payments wasn't really automatically reported. Now rent and utility bills will be mandatory. That's why it was very important to make sure that the Vantage 4.0, because that model's one that followed that. Lenders heavily rely on FICO scoring. Now they're using Vantage scores as equal weight. So remember, there's some good and some bad, with the current of the BBB. You need to understand what the differences are. We're talking about inquiries was a heavy model which penalized consumers. Now soft pulls will require pre-approvals for that. Disputes may be dismissed through a frivolous labeling, but after the suit, now we're talking about a frivolous cause requiring a full investigation. The BNPL, buy now, pay later, was really inconsistently reported. Now it will be required. So if you're getting an item and you're paying different payments because you're doing a buy now, pay later type thing, this can now be put on your credit report. But remember, it's a double-edged sword. If you're paying it on time, it's all good. However, if there's a late payment, that can also hurt your credit. So make sure you're aware of that. Reporting errors usually take 30 to 45 days to resolve. Under this new dispute, now we're talking about 14 days. So for somebody in my line of work, this is great simply because we're talking about shorter times. However, I would love to know what type of mechanisms are they using to verify information on your credit report. And then lenders can deny credit with vague reasoning. Now, under the law, they have to give a clear and plain language and explanation tied to any specific reports. So there's good and bad. There's mainly good in regards of the credit aspect of the big beautiful bill. So we always people what questions they may have, ladies and gentlemen. You can feel free to send me questions at wmore@williamdmoore.com. wmore@williamdmoore.com. One of the things that you can do in the next, 120 days to have a 200 points or more is that know your credit score. It is very important that people know what their credit score is. Continue to pay your bills on time, if possible, 10 days earlier. Remove negative information from your credit report. Easier said than done, but that's why you have somebody like a Coach Moore in place. You can remove excessive inquiries from your report. Credit card utilization. Hey, listen, we can do 15% or lower. Remember, we're going with something specific. We're trying to get more points in a short period of time. This is exactly how you do that. You can become an authorized user. Now, with this, you got to make sure that person has the best credit. Becoming an authorized user can be a very useful tool if the person has good credit. Remember, it doesn't hurt that person. They're paying the bills like they always do. You're just now getting the credit for the on time bill payment. But if they have shaky credit, that can also affect you. And so, in your demographic, there's some of the things that people can do within their demographic in the next 120 days for all the young folks. Look how they're smiling. They're just so excited. They can get a credit card early, keep the utilizations under 10%, become an authorized user, pay the bills on time, check your credit report regularly, avoid too many hard inquiries, understand FICO versus Vantage, maybe start getting small loans, manage student loans wisely, and learn the credit laws. The ages of 24, 35, this is the people who are just graduating from school and now coming into the workforce. Upgrade prime credit cards, maintain a mix of credit, keep utilization low below 10%, monitor and challenge errors, leverage credit for business, prepare for home ownership, be wary of buy now and pay later, use credit for investments, understand FICO 10T model, and plan for major purposes. Here's a demographic that's not smiling too much because they understand that the brunt of all the changes that's been happening is going to hit them the hardest. So refinance high interest debt, maintain elite credit scores, use credit to grow wealth, keep old accounts open, limit co-signing risks, balance personal and credit and business credit, leverage rewards and perks, avoid lifestyle inflation, diversify credit accounts, and monitor lending laws and trends. For the demographic that's retirement age, they're not really thinking about credit, but still, they have to take account of everything that's going on. So you want to keep credit active, pay off high interest debt, monitor for identity theft because it's very strong in this demographic, maintain a strong score for emergencies, refinance or pay off mortgages, reduce dependencies on credit, avoid taking on new debt, plan for medical costs, create an estate plan, and educate the next generation. That is the key thing, is making sure the information and wisdom is passed down to the next generation. Well, listen, I want to thank you for joining this report. If you want to get maybe a one-on-one consultation, you can actually use the QR code there to schedule a one-on-one with Coach Moore, and we will actually go over your credit profile. And we hope that you subscribe to this YouTube channel because this is how we keep the information going. I want to thank you for joining. This is Coach Moore from the great state of New York, your certified credit counselor, Josh Shard.